Joining me right now, we have Michael Hardaway, former communications director to Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, along with Brendan Buck, MSNBC political analyst, and previously press secretary to former House Speaker John Boehner. Also with us, Leah Littman, assistant law professor at the University of Michigan Law School and author of the book Lawless. So welcome to all of you. Leah, what can the Trump administration legally do without authorization from Congress, and what can be done now if their deadly strikes on Venezuelan boats were illegal?
So they certainly can't do what they have been doing because they don't have authority under domestic law from Congress to commit these strikes. What they can do is actually defend the United States if the United States is under attack, as that is defined under international law. So these strikes are illegal. Indeed, they seem to violate multiple federal laws, including the prohibition on murder. This is the deliberate targeting of civilians. There's no historical precedent for this, much less statutory authorization. In a world where you had a Congress that believed in the separation of powers, or that believed we are a government of laws and not men, there would be impeachment articles drafted up yesterday. There would be hearings. And alas, this Congress seems unwilling to do any of that.
We heard Caroline Leavitt almost gleefully boasting that 17 people were killed in these 3 operations. Is there anything that any group could do to legally bring action against the administration?
This is an area of law where it is quite difficult to bring a preemptive lawsuit that would prevent the president from carrying out strikes before he does so. Because in order to bring such a suit, you would need a plaintiff to be able to show that they were about to be the target of such a strike. And of course, the president isn't declaring when he is going to issue these strikes or against whom. So a preemptive lawsuit that could prevent this is basically out of the question, which is why we need a Congress to actually step up and do something.
I mean, Michael, you could make an argument here, but by these actions, the president's going against the Constitution. I mean, this is just extraordinary. And what if the shoe were on the other foot? What if another country did this to Americans? All hell would break out.
Yeah, it's okay when we do it, apparently. And you could say that for so many things that have happened under this president, in terms of he just acts unilaterally in a way that ultimately hurts this country in the long term. It ultimately hurts our allies in the long term. As was just said, this is an illegal act. And so my real question is, where's the Speaker of the House? Where's the Senate Majority Leader that could actually do their jobs, which is providing oversight to this president and holding hearings on all these illegal actions that are happening? One thing I can say is that if Democrats take over after the midterms, those sorts of things will be happening, and there will be accountability for this president in all of these illegal actions.
I mean, Brendan, Republicans can't be in favor of this, right?
Well, I think you have to question whether or not on its face what those boats allegedly are doing is true. And I think there are a lot of people who, and this is probably why the president will get away with this, is there's a lot of people who look at this and say, if these actually are people bringing in illegal drugs into our country that are killing...
Where's the proof? Where's the proof?
Well, I think that's the type of thing that the administration probably has an obligation to explain what evidence they have to back up that this is happening. If there are people who are bringing illegal drugs into our country that are killing people, I think there's a lot of people who would say we should stop that somehow. Maybe this is not the most, this is an extra constitutional way of doing it, but there's going to be a lot of people who have sympathy for being aggressive on these grounds. Now, that said, of course, there are reasons why we have restraint and why we do things a certain way. One, of course, you want to make sure what you're doing is sound, based on the facts, and that we actually know what's going on. But there are principles why you don't want to start something that you don't know how to stop. And we have due process principles that have been core to our government forever. So I think they should probably do themselves a favor and explain what they know, how they know this is happening. But also, I do think it would be good to go to Congress and say, hey, I think that we have a real imminent threat to the United States from these people. And Congress, if you believe that's true, give me authorization to do these kinds of things. I don't think we should, if these actually are people bringing drugs in, I don't think we should shed a tear for this action. I do think we need to be more serious about what the responsibilities and the roles, the proper role of government here. And so, yeah, I do think we can have more engagement from Congress, but let's also appreciate that there is a real threat that coming into this country.
All right. Well, I should note that Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul, he was none too pleased by all this. He was very vociferous in opposition of it. Let's move to the other issue that is really contradicting potentially the Constitution, Leah, and that is that your fellow law professor Aziz Hood wrote an op-ed for Politico saying that Jimmy Kimmel should sue the Trump administration and would have strong odds, as the Supreme Court has recently confirmed the First Amendment blocks the government pressuring private companies to silence speech. Do you think Kimmel should sue? I'm not asking if he will, but should or could, and what are the implications?
I agree he would have an exceptionally strong claim. Before ABC and Disney made the decision to basically suspend Kimmel, you had the current FCC commissioner on a podcast basically announcing that there would be consequences for ABC and Disney if they kept Kimmel on the air. That is government coercion, or what we call job owning. And the First Amendment prevents the government from doing indirectly, pressuring private parties to do something that it can't do directly. And of course, the government can't take comedians off the air because they say things the administration doesn't like. And yet that seems to be what happened here. Again, you had the FCC commissioner basically tell ABC and Disney, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. That's straight up coercion.
So, Michael, conservative-leaning Sinclair, which is, of course, one of the nation's largest operators of local TV news stations, called on Kimmel to apologize to the Kirk family and, quote, make a meaningful personal donation to Turning Point USA. Of course, that's the political nonprofit whose mission is training students to, quote, promote the principles of fiscal responsibility, free markets, and limited government. Does free speech include the ability to donate or not to whomever you choose? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, it's interesting to me that so many Republican organizations, including Sinclair, seem to support free speech when it benefits them, but they don't as it relates to everyone else. What I find interesting is, there's so many Republicans celebrating this horrific incident. And my real question is, what happens when the rabbit gets the gun? What happens in a future Democratic presidency if they did the same thing in Fox News and other conservative outlets? And so I think this is all part of a war on the Constitution being led by this White House and this administration. And that's how we should address it. It's not really about cancel culture. It's about the idea that nearly every piece of this Constitution is being assaulted by President Trump and his allies. And at some point, leaders in Congress, specifically the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader and others, have to step up here. We're getting to a very bad place, and we're only 9 months in.
Brendan, Republican Senator Ted Cruz said he was glad Kimmel's off the air, but he also said that Brendan Carr's words were dangerous and something right out of a mob movie. Will the GOP continue standing behind Trump if he is going beyond what they will accept?
Well, I want to go back to something Michael said. This is not like if Democrats were in charge. There is a reason Republicans for decades have been against the FCC wading into these types of things, because there was a period where Democrats were trying very hard to use the government with something called the Fairness Doctrine to regulate whether or not speech was evenly divided on our airwaves. And we've always been against that. And I'm glad that Ted Cruz is standing up to that. That has been a longstanding principle of the Republican Party for a long time, is the government has no place getting involved in those conversations. And frankly, I don't know if Donald Trump was involved in here. What we do know is we have an FCC commissioner, which is supposed to operate independently, so it is removed from politics. But we have an FCC commissioner who seems very content to do things that he seems would make Donald Trump very pleased with his actions. He has been very aggressive in ways that contradict things that he himself has said in the past. Now, whether that came from the White House, I have no idea. But it doesn't really, I think this is what Ted Cruz was saying, it doesn't really pass the straight face test to say, well, this was clearly just ABC's decision to do it. Yeah, in the context where you had the FCC commissioner making vague threats. So this is the kind of thing that we have always been against, we should be against now. And I'm glad the Democrats are against it now, because there was a long time when they thought the government should be intervening in these conversations as well.
Leah, are we heading for a First Amendment reckoning?
We are way past the time for a First Amendment reckoning. I think we have seen an administration that is all too eager and willing to leverage all of its political power to suppress dissent, whether that is initiating criminal prosecutions against perceived political opponents, whether that is firing or threatening to fire prosecutors who fail to invent crimes against perceived political opponents, and now threatening to review the licenses of any network that has comedians or other programming that the administration doesn't like. When you give an administration that kind of power, you are absolutely threatening our core freedoms of speech, association, our ability to think what we want to think, to say what we want to say.